going on, people? Welcome to another episode of the Underground Unplugged. The title of today's topic is Emancipation. We're going to be talking about the Emancipation Proclamation as set forth by Abraham Lincoln on September 22nd, 1862, and put into action on January 1st, 1863. I want to bring to you an analysis of the so-called Emancipation Proclamation. To Americans, especially those of African descent, it's been viewed as a document that stands for freedom of a people who have been oppressed for centuries by institutions of slavery and bigotry in this wilderness we call the United States of America. But what we must understand is that the very words of the individuals who claim to work for us are the same words that work against us. For as long as we can remember, Abraham Lincoln stood as the great emancipator of our people. You know, he stood as the man who had compassion in his heart to free us from the bondage of slavery. But as we all know, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. So I ask you this question: how could a man who supported slavery in the sense that he owned slaves be compassionate to slaves? It doesn't make any sense at all. One would have to be dumb, deaf, and blind to pay respect to a man who perpetrated such falsehood as a conscientious objector of an inhumane treatment. To read the actual document itself, you will see after analysis of the written words the conspiracy of the government to extend the ranks of slavery farther than what the document stated. One cannot be blind and think that the president himself is truly to blame for such a travesty, understanding that the president is only a means of giving the people an excuse or scapegoat for the problems that arise as a result of the hidden agenda set forth by a government that's set up to keep you and I in bondage in the first place. Have been miseducated to the events of the past. That is why it's up to us, and it's important for all races to understand the true history that they don't teach us. We have to teach it to ourselves. We have to learn. We have to bring that, and we have to pass that down to our offspring. History has shown us that the most intelligent beings are not the ones who teach the truth, but those who take their own words and twist them into knaves and make traps for fools. And that's what's been going on since the Romans and the Greeks came into Egypt and took over everything. They've been taking the true knowledge, they've been twisting it to make traps for everyone else. During this time in which the Emancipation Proclamation was written, we as a people were deprived of education and the basic essentials of reading, the comprehension, and the written word. But in the age in which we live in today, we are far from those boundaries that kept us stagnant in mental growth. The choice, my brothers and sisters, is up to you and I once again to decide whether or not to believe blindly in the faith of those who never had any intention of truly accepting us in the first place. One really thinks about the condition and the trials that we as African Americans have faced in this country, you will see honestly that we've only been considered American citizens for about 35 years. History tells us this. 35 years is no more than a generation past, and we're not so far detached that we think that we have arrived at the promised land. A place where we are, viewed as equal. If it took 400 years for this country to assume the policy of the Emancipation Proclamation, which was created to give you no true freedom in the first place, how long would you assume that it would take for you to be afforded the same right to have actual freedom? Actual freedom. That's the thing we want to talk about. We want to talk about actual freedom. What is actual freedom? What is actual freedom, and what was the reason for the Emancipation Proclamation? Now, first of all, the reason behind the Emancipation Proclamation, you got to understand, during the time when the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation, came out, which was September 22nd, 1862, the country was enthralled within a civil war. Now, as with any war, the point and the purpose of that war would be to, of course, to win that war, but you wanna expose your enemy's weakness, expose those weaknesses, and use that weakness against them. Now, the only thing, the big weakness of the South was their economy. The economy of the South was their biggest downfall because the economy was based on agriculture. The North's economy wasn't based on agriculture. All of their, things like cotton and soybeans and things of that nature were coming from the South, coming up to the North. So, that wasn't a staple in their economy. Their economy was more so, it wasn't industrialized during that time, but there weren't, there are not that many, plantations and fields up north. That's down south. So what Lincoln was doing. You know, he was playing politics. You know, not politics, but he was wargaming. That's what he was doing, really. The Emancipation Proclamation had nothing to do with freeing the slaves at all. It was about crippling the South's economy. When you cripple your enemy's economy, then they have no means of funding their war machine. That's what happened. This Emancipation Proclamation came out, and with that, all the slaves of the southern states that were a part of the Confederacy, all those slaves were released from bondage and allowed to be freed, except for the ones who weren't free were the ones who resided in states such as Tennessee and Kentucky, which never seceded from the North. So all the free states who owned slaves, all of the southern states that had not seceded still, maintained that the institution of slavery, but only the states that seceded from the North or the Union are the ones who were this Emancipation Proclamation actually, spoke to, which is kind of, it's kind of shady. If you actually read it, it doesn't have anything to do with the slave at all. You're just looking at this right here. It's pretty much just an extension of an article of war, actually. Just the means of crippling your enemy. And we got some parts of this. I got the actual Emancipation Proclamation here I'm looking at, and I do want to just read a couple of things out of it. As we notice, the states that this proclamation spoke to were Arkansas, Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Florida, North Carolina, and South Carolina, and Virginia. And like I said, you don't have Tennessee and Kentucky, which were slave states also. You don't have those included in this because they didn't secede from the North. It's interesting to read also, near the end, it talks about, I'm going to read this quote from the Emancipation Proclamation. "And I hereby enjoin upon the people so declared to be free to abstain from all violence unless in necessary self-defense. And I recommend to them that, in case, when allowed, they labor faithfully for reasonable wages." Now this right here, this one little sentence right here is talking about especially those slaves that were freed as a result of the Emancipation Proclamation. They labor faithfully for reasonable wages. It didn't say fair wages, it said reasonable wages. So you can only assume what's reasonable, for an African American or a once just newly freed slave at that time. Slaves worked for free for so many hundreds of years. Now all of a sudden they're free. What is a reasonable wage? It's definitely not what a white man would get. It's not reasonable because you don't look at blacks at that time as really actually people in the first place. The next little section right after that, it reads, I quote, "And I further declare and make known that such persons of suitable condition will be received into the armed service of the United States to garrison forts, positions, stations, and other places, and to man vessels of all sorts in said service, giving blacks the right to join the ranks of the armed services and fight for the North against the South." So they're freeing the slaves in the South, okay, crippling their economy, putting them in a situation to where they can't fund their own war machine, to sustain themselves throughout the war effort. And then the free slaves in the South, they all come toward the North, and you offering them the right to join your military and fight against their once southern plantation owners. And so they go and they fight. So you're actually at the same time you're crippling your enemy, you're crippling their economy, you're downgrading their ability to be able to fund their war machine, but at the same time you're bolstering your military force at the same time because all the blacks are coming to fight on your side. From the bottomless pit, but my hand was made.